Welcome to Big Blend Radio with your hosts Lisa and Nancy, editors of BigBlendMagazine.com.
Hey everybody, welcome to Big Blend Radio with Nancy and Lisa. You know, every fourth Thursday, we get to talk about the Jefferson Highway. And the Jefferson Highway is like the very first vacation route in America. It goes from Winnipeg, Canada to New Orleans, and it's coming back, baby. You know, we think about historic routes like Route 66, but that's exactly what is happening with this highway. It was also known as the Pines to the Palms Highway. And we do this every fourth Thursday. We talk about the history, the music, what you can see and do on the highway. And today we're talking about two women outlaws from Oklahoma. We're very excited about it. I do encourage you to go to the Jefferson Highway Association website and also get involved. They've got an intricate map. You click on the link and you can really see where you may have already been on the highway and just maybe not known about it. Or maybe, hey, time to plan a road trip. So check it out. Go to jeffersonhighway.org. You can also become a member. If you're in the tourism world, strongly advise you join up with this because it's a really cool program for communities on this trail. And as always on our show, we have Roger Bell, the president of the Jefferson Highway Association. Roger, how are you?
I'm great, Lisa. Great to be here again.
Hey, you know what? We're excited. We get to go on another, I think a couple shows ago, we did part of the highway and we're going to do it again. We're going to drive from Madison, Wisconsin. I know that's not on the highway, but it's kind of close. We can detour. And then we're going to go down to Bismarck, Arkansas, which is just outside of Hot Springs. And so I think we'll be able to touch some parts of the highway as we drive. And of course, it's like dirt under your fingernails that never goes away, and you don't want it to. That's kind of what's happened to us. And it's your fault. And it's Arlene Gould's fault from Natchitoches in Natchitoches, Louisiana, for getting us involved in this. But we have two special guests joining us, each one representing a female outlaw. We have Dr. Ron Hood, and he is actually his Belle Starr, who is an outlaw who's been put into many movies, newspapers. She is well known. She's popular. Her gravesite and homestead is actually on his property in Oklahoma. So welcome to the show, Dr. Ron. How are you?
Doing well, thank you.
And so how does it feel representing a bandit, an outlaw?
Well, we, as Roger knows, it's been an interesting topic. There's been a lot of people inquire and a lot of magazine articles and a lot of media interest in Belle Starr, and it waxes and wanes, but it's something that's comes up periodically. So it's kind of odd owning the home site and a grave. So of course you can't own the grave, but it's on the property. So her original place where she was shot's just across the river. So it gets a lot of media attention here and there.
Is she a ghost? Could she be a ghost? Have you seen a ghost?
Oh, here we go.
Well, sort of.
Well, maybe.
Cool. Yeah, cool.
Yeah,
Okay,
we've actually had a haunted tour there before. So.
Listen. Okay,
okay.
This is another show we're gonna do. Yeah, because I know. Listen, everyone, wait for our October show. We've got things planned about ghosts and hauntings and haunted places. And Roger, after this, I need to tell you about a recent connection that we have that actually is about the Jefferson Highway for ghost stuff and music. Yeah, things are growing. It's not stopping. But I want to bring our next guest on, Cynthia Schreiner Smith. No relation to me. Smith is a good name.
It sure
Everybody
is.
knows it. But she owns Sin City Tours. And who doesn't want to own Sin City Tours? It sounds like so much fun, but it's CYN, Cynthia. SinCityTours.com is her website, and she is based out of St. Paul, Minnesota, and apparently it's Sin City. So we love this. Welcome, Cynthia. How are you?
I am doing well, thank you.
Good.
Yes, it's Sin as in Cynthia. And so I introduce myself on my tours. I say, hi, I'm Cynthia, but call me Sin because sinning is more fun.
Well, listen, it is. I'll tell you what.
All righty then.
We do.
You know what?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
We do walking tours in St. Paul and we do a gangster tour. And
Ooh.
we also, I'm so happy to hear you bring up ghosts because we
Yeah.
do walking haunted tours too. So
Oh,
you are
cool.
people after my own heart right now.
Wow.
Cool.
So is St. Paul on the Jefferson Highway or near it?
It is right on the highway and
Dude.
it has a lot of history, a lot of history.
Not that you're a dude,
Cool.
but that's exciting. You know,
Yes.
it's so this is fantastic. I'm glad you're on that. So this is, again, you know, this is this old route, 1915, right, Roger? 1915 is when it started.
Yeah, it was
Um,
organized in 1915, over right before World War One, and St. Paul was definitely on the route. The beautiful St. Paul Hotel, which I had the privilege of staying in several years ago, was very historic to the highway. It was actually a center of tourism for St. Paul, and during our pre-talk here a few days ago with Cynthia, I got to send her actually a advertisement about the St. Paul Hotel, talking about the Jefferson Highway in it. So I don't think she had seen that before, but yes, it was very much part of the highway. And St. Paul has a rich and very fascinating Depression era gangster activity. I'm sure Cynthia can kind of tell us a little bit about the reasons for that, but it was, and there were several places on the route. Kansas City was another one that was fairly
Yeah.
wide open. I had a lot of great rich history, if you want to call it, to the gangster activity involvement that had to fight these culprits.
It's
And
interesting. Yeah, St. Paul, because I'm looking, Cynthia's a co-author of Alvin Karpis and the Barker Gang in Minnesota. I never even knew they went all the way up there, the Barkers. I just I don't know
oh yeah,
why I didn't think that, but apparently they did. So
They
Cynthia
spent a
just
lot of they spent a lot of time up here, so much that I got to write a book about it, and
That's
they're very prominently featured on our tour. And in fact, they did a couple famous kidnappings up here. They used St. Paul as their to rob banks all over the Midwest. I'm sure running up and down the Jefferson Highway to do it, because they did go down to Nebraska and Missouri and Kansas a lot. Alvin Karpis finally was brought to justice at the federal courthouse here in St. Paul. Doc Barker went to trial here, as did several other members of the Karpis Barker gang. Ma Barker lived here for a while.
I love that. I don't know why I
and
love
she's
Bob Barker.
buried on the Jefferson Highway in Welch.
no way.
She is,
No,
along
okay.
with her eldest and her youngest sons are buried next to her.
Wow.
Wow.
See, I thought everybody in Minnesota was squeaky clean for some reason. I don't know why that was. I don't know.
We want you to
why?
believe that it's all smoke and mirrors, this whole Minnesota nice thing. See, it just,
you know what I mean? But I'm like going, it's like you do have Prince the musician, so that's a whole other topic on the Jefferson Highway. But he was kind of squeaky clean, but not. But it just, when I think about the Barkers and everything, but then going into, you are representing today Edna Murray, and she was the Kissing Bandit.
She was the Kissing Bandit, yes, and she was in St. Paul a lot. I spent a lot of years researching that woman, and she has a whole chapter in my book. And I used to portray her as a character on tours pre-COVID for about 22 years. And I got to know Edna's real granddaughter. She came up and took my tour, and
wow.
Yeah, we did, my husband and I produced a documentary called Gangsterland. And we interviewed her for that documentary. So Edna's a woman kind of near and dear to my heart, in a kind of weird way. But to answer your question real quickly, I'm sure everybody's wondering, why did all these gangsters come up to St. Paul, and why did you never hear of it? It really was something that started out with good intentions. We had a police chief, John J. O'Connor, became our police chief in the year 1900. And at the time, the city had quadrupled in size the last 2 decades, and the police department had not grown at all. And he did not have enough money or men to stop the crime. So around 1906, he just sort of did some creative thinking, shall we say, and came up with what became known as the O'Connor system, which was a quiet, under the table agreement with criminals. You can come to St. Paul, we will leave you alone, if you promise to A, do no crime within the city limits of St. Paul, B, give a little donation to the police department, and C, just check in and let us know when you're here and how long you are staying and what your address is while you are here. And so gangsters came here and they hung out while the heat was hot. In fact, Alvin Karpus and Fred Barker and Ma Barker came to St. Paul for the first time in December of 1931 because they killed a sheriff, Fred and Alvin, in Missouri. So they needed a place to hide out till the heat was off. So they came to St. Paul.
Literally, because it gets hot and swampy out
See,
there.
just do it outside the borders and then we don't
This
care.
is fascinating. Yeah. So
Wow.
so this was going on in St. Paul itself. So this isn't one. This was not a state thing. This was just St. Paul had this going on.
This was just St. Paul, and those familiar with the area know that we are the twin cities of St. Paul and Minneapolis. Our downtowns are literally just about 5 miles apart. And crime plummeted to nothing in St. Paul, and it skyrocketed in Minneapolis because they used St. Paul as their home base and would run to Minneapolis or Cambridge or down to Nebraska and rob banks and come back to St. Paul and be protected.
Wow. That's amazing. That's amazing. So I want to get to the Kissing Bandit, but I want to go back to Belle Starr and Dr. Rod. I'm sorry, that's your name, Dr. Rod. Am I allowed to say Dr. Rod?
Yeah,
It
sure.
just sounds so good when we're talking about outlaws. Belle Starr, how did you first hear about Belle Starr? I know you got the property, but did you know about her beforehand?
Well, yeah, every Oklahoman knows about Belle Starr. I mean, I'm a 5th generation Oklahoman, and her history is intertwined with the pre-state history, and she's very notable, not just in Oklahoma, but it's amazing the travel people make to the site. She's world renowned. Even one of the early books was even written in Italy. But being a native Oklahoman, you're just immersed in that history because it's all around us here. So really, the thing is, this was the Old West, and that's what people don't realize. You see the Western movies, and it looks like it's in the desert, but really, it was here. The edge of the frontier was the Oklahoma-Arkansas line, and so all the old Wild West things happened here.
It's really amazing. I started making kind of a database of everything that I could find on this highway, and I have outlaws and I have sheriffs and law-abiding citizens. I have authors, musicians, and so it's taking me a while because it's become huge. It's like almost doing the entire United States. By the way, all these people traveled and did things, but they used this highway for a long time. They really did. And maybe it was the state of the highway, or maybe it was a better highway than other highways, but something drew all these people to this highway. And
the route here in Oklahoma goes back, and we talked about this a little bit in previous broadcasts, but in Oklahoma, you have the trails of the original trail, what we would call the Shawnee Trail or the Texas Road, which was way early. Then you have the railroads that came through, which the main one was the Katy Railroad in 1872. And then you have Jefferson Highway. They were all basically within a mile or so of each other, most of the route in Oklahoma. So you have all these generations. But going back to what Ron said about, he said very well about American West. I think people don't really know that so much Western history happened in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
I don't think people know that there was more deputy marshals killed in, let's just say where he's at Younger's Bend, let's just say 100-mile radius of that area, than anywhere in America. That's a proven fact. And most of them died during this time period of the what we call the early West history. And this makes it such a fascinating part of history. We know about Dodge City, we know about Tombstone, we know about these major things, but they were very short-lived, and that wasn't Billy the Kid, whatever you want to get into, but you could go on and on forever here researching the things that have happened in Indian Territory. And Belle Starr, people have been going to her grave. I mean, for well over 100 years. I mean, within the year or so of his death, I have a story from a gentleman that took a Sunday afternoon journey out to see with the family to see the gravesite of Belle Starr. People have been going there regularly for generations. So it's just it's and this lonely grave up on a hillside, and I'm sure Ron can tell us about that, about how Western historians have portrayed that site and what it really is like.
Yeah,
but they've been
yeah,
going
because
there
it's
for
on his land.
generations.
Yeah, I mean, Ron, this is on your land. So, I mean, if we
Yeah.
go looking for the grave, you're not going to shoot us, right?
No,
'Cause
no.
I always feel when we go looking for things, we're going to get shot.
No, just
It's
the
like-
opposite. We actually created a trail and
Cool.
cleaned up the grave. The grave had fallen apart. There's kind of a little stone monument. But her grave was such. So let's go back a little bit. Just in 1889, her obituary ran in the Chicago Tribune and in the San Francisco Examiner in 1889. She was
gunned down. That's the thing that we haven't talked about.
She was noteworthy from coast to coast, and everybody loves a tragedy, right? And so anyway, her grave's been visited regularly. It was robbed within a year of her death, and then then a stone monument was erected, and that's what we reconstructed. But fantastic photos. In 1899, a newspaper man named Frederick Bard took photos and wrote a book and some articles which played prominently through the Midwest, and it was reproduced in newspaper to newspaper. So her story was perpetuated and well into film. And
Wow.
unfortunately,
Well, and Woody Guthrie wrote a song about her.
no, Bob Dylan.
Wow.
It's
Yeah.
Bob Dylan, Tombstone Blues.
No,
Well,
Belle
that's her
Starr.
song. I
Wood-
used to cover that in
No,
our band.
But
Tombstone
Belle
Blues?
Starr, Woody
Oh, yeah.
Guthrie wrote a song called Belle Starr.
Oh,
That's the title.
yeah.
so
Well,
I
Woody
mean-
Guthrie's from here, I mean, this is he's
I
again
mean,
immersed in.
Yeah.
Oh boy,
is-
man, we're just gonna have
I
to do
know.
one show a month on the music history of Jefferson Highway. It's
Yeah.
insane.
Exactly.
I just found like this whole trove of hard rock. I know that's got nothing to do with Outlaws of the West, but like serious, like Roger, it's never going to end. This again, you and Arlene, look what you started. I'm not gonna
Well, as I
stop
said
on-
before, this cross section of the country is
It's
so unique
insane.
with the culture that is on this route, and you have, it's a discovery. I mean, people that
Yeah.
are traveling the route even now are passing by Belle Starr's house, not really knowing it's there.
Yeah, I didn't know-
They're going
yeah.
through St. Paul and really not knowing the gangster history there. But if you stop and wait a little bit and you research it, discovery is there, and so many different topics like this are
But
there.
Tombstone Blues now is stuck in my head because I used to
Yeah.
cover that song, and I used to cover it in a different
Mhm.
way than Bob Dylan sang it. And
Yeah, the
and
ghost
now
of
I've
Belle
got-
Starr sit. Yeah.
yeah, she's sitting by and talks about the grave and everything. And it's interesting because Bob Dylan, his museum now is in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
So is Woody Guthrie's.
They're
Dude,
right
what
by
is
each other.
going on?
Okay, so and then I'm reading she had a Cherokee lover that now in the song is called Blue Duck. That was his name.
Well, he's buried in Tulsa as well, in Catoosa.
Dude.
So how far is that from you, Ron? How far
No,
is
it's
Tulsa?
Tulsa is 30 miles, I guess.
Okay,
now,
that's not far.
Catoosa
And- huh.
is a suburb of Tulsa. Now it used to be a separate city, but there's a famous photo of Belle Starr and Blue Duck, although they weren't lovers, and but she did a
No?
PR photo for him in Fort Smith. And if you look at the photo, he's wearing handcuffs, but he's buried in the Dick Duck Cemetery in Catoosa, Oklahoma, which is also on the Jefferson Highway.
Wow. Okay, and then there's a statue
is
of her.
crazy.
You said the name of the town not far from you.
It's Bartlesville. Willow Rock has a statue of Belle Starr. So Wood Lakes Rock, Willow Rock. And that was Frank Phillips. You know it as the Phillips 66 people.
Yeah, yeah.
Fantastic museum. Wonderful.
Hmm.
And got a picture of Belle out front, statue.
This is so great though that you we went to Billy the Kid's grave
Uh-huh.
in
Oh,
Fort Sumter,
wow,
New Mexico, and his grave,
crazy.
people had stolen his tomb, like this tombstone, a gazillion times, and now it's all caged up.
Well, I think the different thing about Belle's grave is she's the only one buried there.
Well,
It's a
yeah,
very
yeah, 'cause-
lonely grave, and it is, you have to search it out. Her cabin and the place where a lot of this activity happened in Younger's Bend is all around you, even though the buildings aren't there. You can imagine it if you're there. And I think that, for the Jefferson Highway deal on her, she grew up near Carthage, Missouri, and that's on the Jefferson Highway. And she ended up in Younger's Bend. Younger's Bend is not really on the highway, but it's within a few miles of the highway, near Eufaula, Oklahoma. And the one of the things that Dr. Hood did when he purchased his property was rebuild a very historic cabin and brought it from her native Carthage area in that county, and re-put it together here, basically on site.
It's amazing that you've kept it, because it's so hard to save homesteads. It's so hard to even save graves. There's
It
a
was
lot of
amazing process, let me tell
graves
you.
out there that are unnamed,
bet.
especially if you're an outlaw. But I know she was famous, but I think it's amazing that you've done that and allow people to walk up a trail. Dr. Ron, when people come, do you make them check in? How does that all
no.
work for them to be able to find it?
No, there's several places you can look. I have a Facebook page, Younger's Bend, that gives details, maps, and some of the history.
Okay.
And so back a little bit, Youngers, the Younger gang,
Yeah.
and the James gang, who also didn't fare so well up in Minnesota. So
Also on the Jefferson Highway.
yeah, also on the Jefferson Highway.
Northville.
This was actually a site that they used during the Civil War with some Confederate guerrillas, and they wintered there for 2 years. And so Belle actually then came into the story after she married a Cherokee, and she actually lived on this site, and this is where she thought she was going to kind of spend the rest of her life. And that turned out to be true,
Wow.
but it just wasn't as peaceful as she thought.
Oh, wow. Right where you are now. That was
Exactly.
her
On the
place.
site. Yeah. The cabin's site is right there. The cabin that
Wow.
Roger's referring to is an authentic cabin built in 1850, and it was in north of Carthage, Missouri. It had been
Okay.
covered in siding, and when they pulled the siding off, there's this authentic log cabin from 1850. And so we took it down and brought it all the way down stick by stick and put it there close to the grave, but not exactly at the side of the former cabin.
No, this is amazing. And I do want to touch
It
base
is.
on this. Is it true that Belle Starr's mom is part of the Hatfields, from the Hatfields and McCoy feud?
Yeah, I think that is true. Glenn Shirley talks about that in his book. And Glenn Shirley of the Shirley family is pretty. So her family, Belle came from a prominent family. So first of all, she's her father raises what we know now as Tennessee walking horses, gaited horses. They came from
Beautiful.
Tennessee, chased out by the Civil War. It was before the Civil War, but the beginning. They settled around Carthage. Her mother was a Hatfield, a prominent family. There was a whole series of people from Tennessee that moved near Carthage, and there's an area there in Missouri called Boone's Lick that even Daniel Boone's son had moved there. So there was
Wow.
there was a progression of people that came to the area, and her father was a well-endowed man, had a lot of money, raised very fancy horses, and so he was known as a colonel, but he wasn't really a colonel. It's more like Colonel Sanders. It's an honorary title in the South. He had a hotel, and so Carthage, Missouri, again on the Jefferson Highway. The only remnant really is that there's a plaque in the town square of Carthage that says the Shirley Hotel. So Belle was educated in Carthage with a classical education. She had, Latin and French and mathematics and just
Wow.
everything that a Southern belle needed to be, to have that genteel sort of upbringing. She played piano in the lobby of her father's hotel. She's very talented, very outgoing. Everybody picked at her. So she was used to attention. That carried out through her life. But the story is that she was raised very wealthy, but 10 years before the Civil War, the Missouri border wars were ongoing, and this precursor to the Civil War was already being carried out up in Missouri. Bloody Missouri, they called it. So it was a very unsettled time, and they eventually moved from Carthage to Syene, Texas, which is a suburb of Dallas. Probably not on the Jefferson Highway, is that, Roger? But Belle, being raised in Carthage, she was very well versed with the other wealthy families in Western Missouri, which included the Youngers, father's a state senator, the James, stepfather's a doctor. And the Reeds, which were from Union Hill, Missouri, she married into that family. So these were all very prominent families that stayed home to protect their properties and their wealth, and did not enter into regular Confederate service. So they became sort of an organized band. And a man named William Quantrill, Quantrill's Raiders, again, in a lot of movie fame. Quantrill was a school teacher in Lawrence, Kansas, and became friends with a man named Mays, who actually was a prominent member of the Cherokee tribe here, and is Mays County's just north of us. And so they formed the Quantrill's Raiders, Bloody Bill Anderson, and that whole thing that gets played a lot on stories. That actually happened here too. They were forced out. They were forced out of Missouri. Kansas, of course, was Union, and so they wound up in the Indian territories here. Trail of Tears. They were settled here in the 1820s, 1830s, but it really wasn't supposed to be white people here, and there was no law for whites. So the way that it was set up, the native tribes here the 5 civilized tribes all had their own court systems, were sovereign nations, and so they never allowed them to pursue the arrest or any one of white men. So fairly racist and segregated. So they established a court. It became such a terrible area, so many outlaws, that they established a court in Fort Smith out of the Western District Court of Arkansas under a very famous judge there. And they hung 89 people from this area trying to get it cleaned up. And so, so the number of law enforcement, U.S. Marshals that were killed here, the number of outlaws that were killed here, it's tremendous. Belle Starr was famous because her story of riches to rags and the tragedy, and then being involved in nefarious activities as a genteel Southern lady, it just rang. It just attracted
so
her. Yeah,
it's a good story.
It's a good story.
It's so different.
It's a good story, and it's interesting because you talk. There's also her family, and the one, I think, sisters, Pearl.
No, it's
and
her
Nancy
daughter.
Daughter, yes. And Nancy and I first were like, there was and Pistol Pete sounds so familiar to me, and then I'm sure there's a bunch of Pistol Petes throughout it, all of that time frame. But Pearl Hart was a woman of the West who got caught. She was I swear it was with Pistol Pete. Maybe I gotta look him up. No,
It's a
maybe
different area.
it's a different area.
It's
This
in
is
Oklahoma
Arizona.
territory. Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
I
it's
know,
in
I'm just
Oklahoma
saying-
territory.
No, I'm just saying Pearl Hart was in
Oh,
Arizona,
yeah.
and she got put in jail. And so we saw Pearl, we're like, dude, what's going on with these women? Because she really got herself out of jail from trying to kiss the inmates. And see, I want to go to the Kissing Bandit here, but she was pretending she was pregnant, and eventually they all let her out. And she also became this notorious woman who she was smart, and she knew how to outwit people, and that was kind of her game. I think kind of like Belle Starr. And but it was just interesting but the name is very, I'm going, oh my gosh, it's the same. Are they all connected? But I think it's just that was one of those, popular
Well,
names that
the
oh,
Belle
Judge
Starr has
Booth.
the ultimate whodunit really in history to me historically, because her, as we speak today, her murder and death, which is she
Yeah,
was killed with a shot in the back of the head while crossing a river near to Younger's Bend, and it's debated for over 100 years. And even though I know Ron has specific thoughts as I do on likely who was her murderer, it's to me the ultimate whodunit. And
yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, that would be really, I mean, it's unusual for a woman to
exactly,
be shot in the back of the head. I mean, come on,
Yeah,
get a
that's
grip.
that's
yeah,
that's
that's
No, I
exactly
mean,
right.
stuff.
exactly. I'm looking at it going, no. But
Right. Right.
so I've gone down the rabbit hole big time here.
Well, speaking of rabbits, we got to get to Edna Rabbit
Okay.
Murray. She is the Kissing Bandit. And so how did she get her name, Cynthia? I mean, and so would she, because she does tie back to Oklahoma, but how did she get her name as the Kissing Bandit?
Well, there's a lot of misinformation out there about how she got that name. You will
See, here
read,
we go again.
there you go. You will read so many stories that are wrong, but I just about got it from the horse's mouth, because her granddaughter, as I said, who's still alive and living in Oklahoma, told me how the story came about, because her grandmother told her. It was when she was married to her third husband and
Okay.
living, there's a
Yeah.
long story there, but
Yeah,
she was living in Kansas City, which is, of course, on the Jefferson Highway. And it's kind of interesting. Her second husband was Diamond Joe Sullivan, and he was in prison for murder. And while her husband was in prison for murder, her mother-in-law sent her a bunch of money for Joe's defense. And instead of using it for her husband's defense, she took it and bought herself a big house with lots of rooms and put furniture in it, and got herself a boyfriend, Jack Murray, and whom she married once her husband was executed in the electric chair. So that was real convenient for her. And she went off then bootlegging and dealing in lots of other little sort of underworld things there out of her house that she rented for boarders and things like that. But then a bunch of her illegal alcohol that she had coming up from New Orleans got hijacked, and they'd spent all their money on this booze, and they suddenly needed money. So she and her husband, Jack, decided to start robbing people, broke into a few houses, stole some jewelry. But then one day they found out there was this Lutheran minister who had a sort of a side job delivering money to the bank for local businesses, because if you can't trust the minister to take your money to the bank, who can you, right? So they knew this was his schedule, and he was going to have a bunch of money in his pocket. So she and her husband, Jack, kidnapped the guy right off the streets in Kansas City, and they drove him out to the country quite a ways. And they took his shoes, because they were going to abandon him there in the country. And it would be more difficult for him to walk back to Kansas City without any shoes on. And the way her granddaughter says it, that minister was now using words a man of God should not know. He was really angry. And Edna, who was pretty good looking and was very self-confident about her sexuality, started laughing and playfully said, "Oh, honey, I'll just kiss you. That'll calm you down. That'll make it all better. I'll kiss you." And she never did kiss him. She never did kiss anybody. All the stories out there say she would kiss people and distract them while her boyfriend emptied. No, she never kissed anybody but her husband's or her boyfriend. I should say boyfriends. But she did get captured for this crime and put on trial in Kansas City. And of course, the minister is testifying to this, and the newspapers in Kansas City thought that is really funny. So they called her the Kissing Bandit. And even though she never kissed anybody, they also called her the Flapper Bandit, because like I said, she was young, she was pretty, and she was always stylishly dressed because she had the money to do that. So, and yeah, so that's how she got the name Kissing Bandit.
I
That's
see
so
all these
cool.
little, like, it's the same thing, Billy the Kid, like we were just saying earlier, but like really Belle Starr and her getting, to try and find the truth is really hard, but she did live in Oklahoma at a time, right?
She was born in Marion, Kansas, but as a young child, her family moved to Carden, Oklahoma, which is just a few miles north of Miami. So it's just
On the Jefferson Highway.
on the
Mhm.
Jefferson Highway. That's right.
See?
And she grew up there, married her first husband after she got pregnant, had her only child, Preston, married a second guy that didn't last long. And then she just was having a hard time living there in Carden. So she took off and when she was 23 and got a job as a waitress in Sapulpa,
Wow.
which is of course just outside Tulsa. And while she was working there as a waitress, she was 23 and a guy came walking in one day. His name was Volney Davis.
Mhm.
And he was only 19, but he was real handsome. And she fell in love at first sight. He was born in the Cherokee Nation part of Oklahoma before it was a state. And he just said, you're kind of too pretty to be a waitress. Why don't you just come with me? And she said, okay. And so she abandoned her
Wow.
4.5-year-old child, sent him back to Carden to live with her parents. And she took off with Volney. And Volney was childhood friends with the Barker family.
Oh, here
Doc
we
Barker
go.
was, they were in the same gang together in elementary school. So he knew Freddie. He went over to the house. There was 4 Barker brothers, Herman, Lloyd, Arthur, also known as Doc, and Fred, the baby. And he was friends with Doc. And so he was over at the Barker farm a lot, considered Ma just like another mother. Actually, she treated him better than her own mother, his own mother. And she loved him like another son. So of course, then when the Karpus Barker gang was formed, Edna was traveling with Volney. And that is how she ended up coming up to Minnesota, because she came up with Volney to join the rest of the Karpus Barker gang when they were up here planning their bank robberies and things like that.
And kidnappings. And that's how she got nailed. Didn't she get nailed in Pittsburgh? Which we drove through, and Pittsburgh looks like a fine, upstanding town in Pittsburgh, Kansas. And
Yes,
the
she was.
Jefferson Highway Association had their annual conference there just a few months ago, but she got nailed there. I mean, that was.
She did.
I had no idea about that until recently. So that I'm curious about that myself, where that happened.
It's a real connection we have here today between Oklahoma and Minnesota. Who knew? But
Yeah.
she and her boyfriend Volney Davis had split from the Karpus Barker gang. They had kind of a falling out. Something Ma Barker did not like any women dating any of the people she
Ooh.
considered her boys.
Yeah,
Alvin
yeah.
Karpus,
Oh,
Volney
yeah.
Davis, her real boys.
You got to have control.
Yeah, they were. Oh, absolutely. She could not
Yeah.
cut those apron strings at all.
No, you got to control.
They had a big fight up in Ohio, and Volney Davis and Edna split off, and Volney did some bank robberies of his own. And then they ended up in Kansas City in early February 1935, along with Edna's sister, Doris, who also hung out with gangsters. She was dating Jess Doyle, another Karpus Barker gang member.
Wow.
So the 4 of them came to Kansas City. Edna came there to get her hair
They're
done.
basically dating the whole band is what's going on. And
Yeah.
you're not
Basically
supposed to.
it, yes.
Yeah, no,
And,
doesn't work.
Volney needed to get his car serviced, his stolen car, because it got a little dinged up in the bank robbery. And somehow a police officer recognized him, and Edna was at home, and Volney didn't come back. And so they were kind of concerned. And then Jess shows up and says, your sister's been arrested for murder. And she's like, wow, why would my sister kill somebody? And so Jess, her sister's boyfriend, and Edna decide that Kansas City is too hot. She has no idea where Volney is. So she takes off to where her brother, Harry Stanley, had a farm in Pittsburgh. And
Wow.
they were at the farm, and Jess Doyle was like, I got to go find your sister. I got to go see what's going on. I'm going to go out and get a newspaper. And he ended up going and getting a newspaper and reading about it. And then somebody recognized him. The FBI shows up and surrounds the cabin, and they come bursting in, and Edna pulls her gun out of her garter or wherever she had it and throws it on the couch, and she gives up. And so she and Jess then got sent back to St. Paul to be put on trial for the kidnapping of a very prominent citizen in St. Paul. It was the second kidnapping that the Carpus Barker gang did. She and Volney were not involved in the first one, which was William Ham Jr., president of the Hams Brewery, big brewery here in St. Paul. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Don't do that to breweries. What the hell?
You just say, I'll let you go if you give me all your beer. Yeah.
You gotta come up. You gotta come up. We do some great, there's a little microbrewery in the old Hams Brewery complex now. And
Cool.
the first distillery since Prohibition in Minnesota is in there. And we do these tasting tours of the old Hams complex and talk about the kidnapping. It's fun. But they then they kidnapped William Ham in June of 1933, and then in January of 1934 they kidnapped Edward Bremer, who was the president of a bank, but he was also the son of Adolf Bremer, who was president of the Schmidt Brewery in St. Paul. So pretty much both of these major kidnappings were people from breweries, and the theory is that both of them were continuing to make beer illegally during Prohibition. Now that Prohibition is going away, there maybe needs to be some revenge for some high prices during Prohibition. So that's why these kidnappings took place. But Volney Davis, Edna Murray's boyfriend, was very active in the kidnapping. And in fact, they kidnapped him, Ed Bremer, right after he dropped his 8-year-old daughter, Betty, off at school. And they boxed him in with 2 cars, so he couldn't go anywhere. Alvin Karpus and Doc and Volney behind him, and then Fred Barker and another guy, Harry Campbell, in front. And they open the front doors of the car, and Doc Barker pushes the banker down. Volney jumps behind the wheel. And it didn't go very well because neither Volney nor Doc were very bright, but the banker was very smart. And those old cars, you may know this, your foot has to be on the gas pedal or the clutch at all times, or the engine dies. And the engine died when they knocked the banker over, and Volney could not find the electric starter button. And Doc starts to panic, and he starts hitting him on the head with the butt of his gun. And the banker is struggling, and Volney is panicking. I can't find the button. So they start screaming at him, where's the button? And finally the banker goes, you know, these idiots are going to keep beating me until they get the car started. So he reached up with his bloody hand, and Mr. Bremer pushed the button, and they drove away. At the time, Volney and Edna had an apartment just 1 block from where the kidnapping took place. So some of the planning took place in their apartment, and Edna was present. And then the Bremer family, this guy who was kidnapped, was very prominent, as I said. And in fact, Adolf Bremer, the father of the victim, was good friends with President Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, and had donated a lot of money to the campaign. And Roosevelt even talked about this kidnapping in one of his fireside chats. And the Kansas City massacre had happened, and the FBI now had the rights to carry guns and arrest people. And this kidnapping was going to end up being one of the first prosecuted under the brand new Lindbergh law, which made kidnapping a federal crime if you took him across state lines. And they did. They took him to Chicago. And Edna Murray was then approached by Alvin Karpus, who said, you know, the heat's on. I'm afraid all these drunken, drug-addicted girlfriends of the gang are going to talk. So I need you, because you're the only woman I can trust here. He didn't even trust his own girlfriend, Alvin Karpus. He trusted Edna. She was about the only female gangster, if you really want to think about it that way. So he said, you're going to guard these women. And Edna was not pleased, because she really didn't like Fred's girlfriend, Paula Harmon, who pretty much was just drunk or on opium at all times.
This really does sound like Floozies of the band. I'm sorry.
It really is.
It does.
It really is. So Edna ended up watching them for a while, taking them to Chicago. And then, of course, she was in on the planning. She was helping to hide it. So she was brought back to St. Paul, and they had a big trial. Jess Doyle, Doc Barker, Byron Bolton. I mean, all these guys.
This is so connected to Catherine Kelly and Machine Gun Kelly. The
There's
story of how
another
they
whole
got
story.
nailed. That is, I mean, just even how, what's his name got in there as the head of the FBI and the whole kidnapping thing.
J.
And
Edgar
they
Hoover.
took him to Chicago. Yeah,
Yes.
they took him to Chicago.
Yeah.
Thank
And
you.
that
I was going to
kidnap-
give you
that
the wrong
kidnap-
guy.
you're-
Yeah. I was
You're
gonna give the
talking
wrong
about the
president.
Charles Urschel kidnapping in Oklahoma, I
Mm.
believe.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
okay, so Machine
all
Gun Kelly
connected.
kidnapped him and immediately went
It's
straight to
crazy.
St. Paul, Minnesota to launder the money, which
Oh,
he
see,
did.
that is a connect here.
Oh, very much. And in fact, he was in a bar in St. Paul feeling a little too relaxed about the protection there and was blabbing about doing this kidnapping in Oklahoma, not knowing that there was a couple of FBI agents sitting there. And FBI agents
Mhm.
were not in on the fix. It was simply the St. Paul police. So that's
Wow.
kind of
Wow,
what
you
got him in
guys.
trouble was his.
This
There's
is
a-
insane. This
There's
is
a
insanity.
connection also to Cynthia, isn't there, to Dillinger?
Yeah.
John Dillinger, in fact, there's a great book, if people listening want to look it up, there's a great book by Paul Maccabee, a local guy, called John Dillinger Slept Here. He stayed in an apartment on Lexington Avenue in St. Paul, just a block away from where the Bremer kidnapping happened. He also had a couple apartments in Minneapolis, even though they didn't have protection there. Dillinger was in town. Babyface Nelson came to town.
Mhm. It's
all
like
the
a little
Barkers.
old boys club.
Yeah, and I also regards to Machine Gun Kelly. Now we have a musician named that. I'm like, what? But
Yeah.
there is.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
Machine Gun Kelly and Catherine Kelly, like she really was like the woman like behind this,
See,
like Ma Barker. She was
that,
very good
no,
with
no,
her
no,
friends.
she wasn't like Ma Barker. Catherine Kelly was jealous of what was going on with the Barker gang. And she wanted her guy, Machine Gun Kelly, her husband, to have that kind of notoriety. Machine Gun Kelly was actually terrified of guns.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
Catherine was the
Right.
one. If there's a
Catherine
book,
was the one that
Yeah.
pushed him. She pushed him, right. Ma Barker, this is another myth.
Wow.
Ma Barker did not, I mean, she was an enabler. Let's put it that way. She thought her boys were picked on when they were growing up. She didn't see that they did anything wrong when they were, robbing little drugstores and things like that. She was just, my boys can do no wrong. But she didn't actively push them into the gangster lifestyle the way Catherine Kelly pushed Machine
Yeah.
Gun Kelly into doing
Catherine
it.
Kelly did. That was okay. So I didn't know that about Ma Barker, but she really did. Barbara Casey is an amazing author, and she wrote the accounts of Catherine Kelly, like, because everybody looked at Machine Gun Kelly ending up in Alcatraz and everything.
No.
And
You look at that picture of Machine Gun Kelly in Alcatraz as he's being locked up. It's a very famous photo. He's got the biggest grin on his face.
Yeah.
And I always
Yeah.
think it's because he's happy to be away from his pushy wife.
I
don't
know, because she was like,
Oh, he's
talk
going
about you ain't
peace at
nothing but a
last.
hound dog,
Here's the
you
thing.
know?
So
I really
funny.
want to talk about Ma Barker because this is
Okay.
a passion of mine. I want to get this in before we run out of time.
Mhm.
Ma Barker had 4 sons. They all became gangsters. They all met an untimely death, every one of them.
Wow.
And they all died by a bullet. Suicide. One was murdered by his wife. Doc was was killed trying to escape from Alcatraz. And of course, Fred was killed by the FBI along with Ma. Ma traveled with the boys because she couldn't cut those apron strings, as I said.
Right.
But there was a member of the Barker gang, Harvey Bailey was his name, and he famously said, and this is a direct quote, "The old woman did not have the brains to plan breakfast, much less a bank robbery."
Oh.
Alvin
Wow.
Karpis said in his autobiography that when they were planning jobs, Ma would go into the kitchen, shut the door, turn the radio up really loud. She knew they were gangsters. She just didn't want to know the details. And out of respect for Ma, they often planned their jobs in cars while they were driving. They were staying in a cabin on White Bear Lake, which is just north of St. Paul. And they would row out on a boat into the middle of the lake to plan one of these kidnappings so that Ma wouldn't hear the details.
Wow.
So she never was arrested, never photographed, never fingerprinted. She never had a wanted. You'll see wanted posters for Ma Barker online. They are all fakes. She never had a wanted poster. The closest she had to getting a wanted poster was on one of Freddie's. There was a little note on the bottom that said, "Traveling with an old woman thought to be the mother." That's it.
Wow.
But she
You
had
can't call her an
a
old woman.
untimely
That's just-
death.
That's
She and Freddie were in Ocklawaha, Florida, which is near Lake Weir. They were in a cabin on Lake Weir, and someone had recognized Fred, and the FBI was called. And again, the FBI had barely just gotten the rights to carry guns and arrest people. Most of the agents did not have criminology degrees. They were lawyers and accountants. Originally, they were just supposed to be the Bureau of Investigation. It was J. Edgar Hoover who really pushed for them to be more like a police force. But anyway, there was a gun battle that went on for several hours. And after the gun battle stopped, all these agents sat there and went, okay, nobody's shooting back. Who's going to go in? And they sat there for 45 minutes arguing who's going to go in and check it out. None of them wanted to go in. They finally convinced the groundskeeper, the gardener, to go in. And the gardener comes out and he says, you know, there's a couple dead people in the upstairs bedroom. One's an old lady. She's sitting up, and there's a younger guy in her lap. Looks like she was trying to staunch his wounds when they died. And the FBI is like, okay, this is a problem. We have killed the old lady. So what do we do? So the next day, all these newspapers are publishing photos of Ma's dead body that they claim they found in the cabin. She's lying on her back. There is a smoking Thompson submachine gun next to her. So they admit they didn't go in there for 45 minutes. I've never fired a Tommy gun, but I have a feeling it does not smoke for 45 minutes.
Long. Yeah.
That long. So, and then J. Edgar Hoover starts writing these articles for magazines and sending out press releases. Yeah, I said that Alvin Karpis was the leader of the gang, the brains. I called it the Karpis Barker gang in all of my memos, but turns out it was the old woman. So you see why we had to kill her. And that is the legend of Ma Barker. So this is the thing, you know, you were talking about before, like with the mystery of Belle Starr. History is not this black and white thing. You have to dig the evidence, and you have to take all of the different witness accounts. So we have the FBI saying Ma was the brains of the gang. We have Alvin Karpis and other gang members saying, no, that's not true. And you get to decide for yourself. I personally have made the decision that I believe Alvin Karpis, that Ma Barker was not the brains of the gang. She certainly was not innocent. She aided and abetted. That's for sure.
Right.
But
that's interesting.
But this then, you know, Hollywood gets a hold of stories like this.
Yeah.
And then that becomes the truth.
It
like
does.
They'll make a movie and it becomes the truth.
For example, the movie about Ma Barker, she looked nothing like Angie Dickinson, not even close.
Yeah, I want to go back to Dr. Ron. Dr. Ron, here you are with Belle Starr's Gravesite, Homestead, and you're in that territory of her, you know, where she was. So we were talking about that at the beginning, like she got like almost overpopularized. Do you meet people as they come onto the property who kind of think, you know, like she's Ma Barker in a way? Like, is this kind of resonate the same way as Ma Barker and you know, the Kissing Bandit with Belle Starr and her story, that she wasn't as bad maybe, but
she kind of had that
still hardcore, you know,
kind of she's kind of admired because of you know, the situation. She was after the Civil War, she made something for herself, and so there's a lot of admiration. Interestingly, a lot of people come to the gravesite to honor her. They leave things on the grave, usually they leave bullets and flowers and coins, and everyone that comes up usually says something like, you know, she was my great grandmother. In actuality, she had very few children. We talked about her daughter Pearl. Her son Ed Reed was actually killed in the line of duty, and is actually one of the sheriffs, the marshals that we talked about from Fort Smith. He was killed in the line of duty near Catoosa again, where Dick Duck and Blue Duck are at. So the story kind of generates an aura, outlaw, and you know, so there are a lot of biker guys come up. You know, there are a lot of people dressed up in period clothes. It's just the strangest thing that attracts people. And it's not a tourist thing. There's not anything there. It's still up in the woods, and you got to go up this little trail. But we had historians from McGill University in Toronto. We had a historian from University of Oregon, all writing stories and doing investigation on that period of history. It's very fascinating for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think
Wow.
especially right after the Civil War, like my first thing was when we were going to talk about Belle Starr and then, Edna was, oh, did they ever meet? But no, Belle Starr was before her. And you got to think about these women back then. And quite frankly, when you think about the Jefferson Highway, this is pre the highway, right? And then there was the highway, but you've got to think the territory is not easy to traverse and ride horses through for a woman, especially in the clothing we were supposed to wear back then. It just wasn't that easy. And, the West is not easy. And when you start getting into, it's hot, or you could end up, swampy in Minnesota maybe, and then all of a sudden you're in like hardcore snow. It's just a rough road for outlaws, but I think they knew their routes, right? It's almost
Well,
like
they
they
had to be
knew.
near transportation. And so if you look at this, all the going up the Jefferson Highway up to Minnesota and back, and so there's another road that crossed, which it really typically is about like where I-40 sits now, and that was a road that was formed to be really the entry to the West after the gold rush in 1849. And so a man named Edward Beale actually surveyed that and actually formed a road that was so compacted it was going to be the railroad, but the Civil War put an end to it. So you've got an east-west traverse all the way to Santa Fe, and you've got the north-south Texas road, and then you've got the highway coming in, all meeting at Eufaula, Oklahoma. So it's not just a pure dumb luck that these people are along the major routes of transportation at the time. Even though they were rough, it's still, they tended to congregate along these paths of transportation. I mean, even in England, the old highwaymen, the highway was where
Right.
people, there were a lot of bad activities going along the
Right.
highway.
Well, it was bad. If
Yeah,
you were the
you thought-
highwayman at night, you were not out there being innocent,
Right.
But and you got to think the Santa Fe Trail and stuff like that. I mean, those were the old royal roads of, Native Americans, Indians, Spanish came through later. So a lot of these tracks were done in ancient times, and then they just developed. And like the Santa Fe Trail is really interesting because that was one of these trails that is a two-way system. They didn't just have one road. There was like, you're going this way, you're going that way, because commerce started to happen, and it became like you could be a peddler on the road. Now you're okay if you're a peddler on the highway, but you were kind of looked at like, ooh, you're the highwayman. You got Willie Nelson, Johnny
Yeah,
Cash.
exactly.
Come
Yeah.
on, let's have some
But
good music now.
You brought up those ancient paths of were really utilized, and there was part of the Jefferson Highway actually follows some of the path of the Osage Trace, which was historically a trail. And you've heard of the Natchez
Wow.
Trace, maybe
Yeah.
that runs.
Yeah.
So great place to ride through. But the same thing happened here. This was a point of over to the Pecos River Valley and northeast New Mexico. There were major trade routes across this area well before the white men ever arrived.
Right.
And then they just tended to use those as a mark or a map to put in. And you can look at the Texas Road later becomes what we knew as the Katy Railroad, major north-south through Oklahoma.
Well,
It's
like
interesting
Natchez,
too, you're
Louisiana.
talking about
is-
this. I just
is-
want to mention real quickly because
Yeah.
it's kind of piggybacks on what you were saying, Professor Ron, is if you plot the bank robberies of the Corpus Barker gang, you'll go down the Jefferson Highway and you'll see a lot of them are like 100 miles east or 100 miles west. So it's all clustered along.
A corridor that they use for transportation. They want to
Right, a
get
corridor.
Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly.
Huh.
Wow.
I wonder if their roots also went with the moonshiners. I know that kind of went out of North Carolina, but these guys all kind of ran.
Well,
certain
Minnesota
routes.
provided a lot of alcohol for the rest of the country during Prohibition. And in fact, Andrew Volstead, the Volstead Act, was a congressman from Granite Falls, Minnesota.
right.
And we supplied a lot of alcohol up and down, not just down the highway, but also up to Canada, which was, of course, our neighbor up there where the Jefferson Highway starts, because they didn't have Prohibition there. But we had a lot of the raw materials for making alcohol. We have a lot of water, we have a lot of grain, we have a lot of Germans. So We were making a lot of alcohol.
All the
you go.
necessary ingredients
yeah.
And
there.
women were doing it too. Moonshiners were women.
A lot of
Um,
them were, yes.
Yeah, a lot of women in there. So like they were hardcore, like, let's get this business going. I do want to touch on the old trails though, because Natchitoches, Louisiana is part of the El Camino Real de los Tejas National Historic Trail. And this is an interesting trail that goes through Texas. Part of it is touching into the Jefferson Highway. I bet a teeny weeny little bit. I think, yeah, Gladewater is part of, oh, I'm going to be wrong. But anyway, Natchitoches is part of one of these trails. I mean, it's this ancient trail, and you can, like you were talking about Natchez Trace, Dr. Ron, you can go, you are walking with these, it's almost like Natchez Trace has it where the buffalo ran through, and it's like you're in a tunnel almost. And there are places off between Nacogdoches, Texas, which was the first settlement in Texas, to Natchitoches, Louisiana, which is the first settlement. There's a Los Lobos Neo, there's a swale. I'm never going to get the name right, but there are these swales out there, and it is almost the same thing where you're almost in this corridor with mounds on either side of you from these ancient roads of people walking through. And it's a trip, man. And like that's the ancient times, but like outlaws knew those paths
Oh, sure.
if they needed to run from
Yeah,
someone.
absolutely.
Like, you know what I mean?
The Bill Road actually transversed from Fort Smith west, but it traveled along an Indian trail, and it was slated to be the gateway to the west and the gold rush. And the Beale house is right across from the White House. So, I mean, Beale became a very prominent man in the time, being able
Fred
to.
Beale. Who's Fred Beale? Because he was somebody big in San Diego.
Edward F. Beale was the guy. He was a surveyor, but he was very involved in the gold trade in establishing our land route, because at the time, to get to California, you had to go around the tip of South America. There wasn't a Panama Canal, so an overland route was a really important thing, and it really came through here. And so the overland route from Fort Smith to Santa Fe actually passed just within eyesight of Belle's home side and her grave. And just like the Santa Fe Trail, those sandstone hills, the ruts are still there from the wagons and the amount of traffic. So this was a major trade route. And so I think the books portray her as being way back in the woods. And we think of it that way, Roger and I, because she's way up in the away from anything at this stage. But back then, the major highways passed just right beside her. And it was a lot of things along that highway that happened. Several marshals were killed, and lots of things.
That's kind of crazy. I feel like the long black veil should be her song or something, it's just like, she's walking up that hill, but I want to also go back to you, Dr. Ron, on the music. So here's Bob Dylan, Woody Guthrie in Oklahoma. And then one of my most favorite musicians of all time, J.J. Cale, is in Oklahoma City. I did not know. I just suddenly went, when you were talking about it, I was like, I bet you J.J. Cale's from Oklahoma, and holy cow, he is.
Yeah, he is. If you look at Oklahoma musicians, you're going to see a long track record, especially in country type music. You're going to see a tremendous number. Reba McEntire, Vince Gill. I mean, Garth. Wow. It just goes on and on and on, and it goes way back.
We've already talked about the jazz history, Lisa.
Yeah, I know, jazz history. But but this is insane. Like, and we were just talking to Steve Blaze. He's the lead guitarist of Lillian X, which is a hard rock band who's been in the Louisiana Hall of Fame for music twice, as definitely one of the first hard rock bands, because they didn't recognize hard rock that much in Louisiana at the time. And he was talking about all these bands anyway, and he's a ghost hunter. Anyway, he's all in for the Jefferson Highway. I'm just saying, because there's so much history that is not, there's history, and then there's current history of what is going on today. And I think for travelers, we were talking about these women outlaws. Well, of course, we went into Ma Barker there. Thank you for that, Cynthia, because I think this is
she's
cool.
buried on the Jefferson Highway.
Yeah,
she is.
Ma Barker, yeah.
Oh my God! So
Edna's not. Edna's in San Francisco.
Well, I'll next time we go to San Francisco, because we'll go visit her. But Cynthia, I mean, your information is amazing, and everyone needs to go on your tour. I want to go on your tour so bad.
I
want to go to
hope
the
you
brewery.
do.
Oh,
That would be
you
great.
know, we will come to St. Paul. Trust me, we're going to be up and down the highway.
Yeah.
I mean, this is it. It's happening. We're in it. And again, it's Roger and Arlene's fault. And thank you very much. But now we're kind
Yes.
of addicted to this. Nancy has made a whole database of historic people on the
Oh,
trails.
and
Like,
I'm
I don't
so
think we're
not,
going to be able to even drive a mile without
No.
Nancy telling me to pull over.
yeah,
This is
because
how
I'm
bad
so
it
not,
is.
and I'm so not done because there's so much.
I know,
I
but it goes
now,
up to what it is now. And I think that's the
this
thing,
is-
Roger.
it's the
Travelers
heart of
go
our
in,
country.
it is the
This-
heartland.
Yeah.
And
That's why when you're driving around, you come take my walking tour. It's a great time to stretch your legs.
Yeah,
when you're
because
driving up and down the highway.
I like it. I like the walking tours
it's almost
and
like
ghost tours.
I could sit here for the next 20 years and not be done.
So then we need to drive it. But this is the thing, you know, we talk about music, we talk it, no matter what, all these things just connect to it. It's a corridor. And whether it's music from the past and happening right now, that's the point. As a traveler, you could be driving through, go visit Belle Starr. You could go on a walking tour with Cynthia,
Mhm.
right? Come out of Winnipeg, go see Cynthia, go for a walking tour, go hang out in a brewery, head south, go see Belle Starr. And then next thing you know, you're at the Bob Dylan Museum. And next thing you know, you're in New Orleans soaking up some amazing, you know, culture. But then, hey, you could be seeing a rock band that is like now, you know, so it's kind of this, we have to, as we visit all these sites, take in history, it's like then and now and the present moment when we're there. So it's so exciting. I'm like beside myself. So anyway, everyone go to jeffersonhighway.org. They have an amazing Facebook group. If you go to Facebook, there's a discussion group there. So everyone's posting different sites and historic sites, you know, all these things you can learn about and you can geek out on it like I do. But go to jeffersonhighway.org also to get the map, become a member, be involved. If you are a tourism entity, definitely, if you're a museum, be involved. Roger, the one thing I know we have to go, but signs, that's something people can get involved with, right? If we're on a trail somewhere and a town could say, hey, we want to have a Jefferson Highway sign so
Yes.
people know, right? That's something that you
Yes,
guys are doing.
we have a new program. We actually have it on the first page of the deal. You can click on it for our signage program. But one of the new things we have is a official sign. We have official signage in Iowa. The whole route is marked in Iowa. It soon will be marked in Oklahoma. That's going to happen probably next year. But for those communities that don't have state signage, we're already starting to see some. We had one in Missouri recently that bought signs from us. They're not, it's not a very expensive thing. The signs are basically costing about $75 a piece or so. And we can get you fixed up on that, and talking to a lot of communities about getting excited about this as we move forward here to make this Americana tourist heritage route that people can travel.
Awesome. Awesome. Dr. Ron Hood, thank you so much for joining us and sharing information
my
about
pleasure.
Belle Starr. And give everyone your Facebook group, your Facebook page again, so people can follow. I just followed too.
Yeah, Younger's been on Facebook. It's actually information. It goes back to 2010, and everything from court records to all sorts of hypothesis about a murder. There's a lot of things posted there. So it's just the history as we put the cabin together. And so as we ran into some very interesting people and some very interesting things that happened even after Edgar Watson left Oklahoma. Peter Matheson wrote a book called The Shadow Country. It's just some fascinating reading. And so, yeah, it's the Facebook page serves as kind of a guide to some of the data and some of the books. So,
well, thank you for doing that. I mean,
yeah,
I think it's
that's cool.
outstanding that you've done this, and you know, like you said, open your property to people being able to visit her resting place, and leave, you know, bullet shells and things.
Yeah.
And other
That's so
people leave
funny.
pennies, but that is awesome. Again, everyone, Cynthia's website is sincitytours.com. CYN for Cynthia, sincitytours.com.
Yes.
If you're like us, we want to go and hang out with Cynthia. And
I hope you
hopefully-
do.
Mhm,
it's happening. It's
for
not a
sure.
hope. It's going to happen, and then you're going to go, oh my God, they're not stopping.
That's
So-
fine with me.
No, we're excited. And Dr. Ron, hopefully we'll get to the gravesite too. And
Sure.
Roger, you've got to be there because I know you're into law and order, so you got to make sure we behave.
I will
So-
be there.
Okay,
watch out.
good. Good. Thank you all for joining us. Everyone, keep up with us at bigblendradio.com. Every fourth Thursday is all about the Jefferson Highway. And we want to thank Natchitoches, the Convention and Visitor Bureau, for sponsoring today's show. Go to natchitoches.com, and that is NATCHITOCHES.com. They are the oldest settlement in Louisiana and one of our very favorite places to visit. And
Mhm.
they have meat pies, they have Cane River Lake, they have good music, they have shopping,
This
they
is
have
really
festivals,
nice.
they rock. So go check it out. And we're going to close with a song called Little Liar, since we're talking about outlaws. And it's from the album Glorious, Glorious by our friends, The Joiners. So here it is, Little Liar. Thank you all for joining us.
1, 2, 3, 4. Baby, now somebody else is breaking my bed. There's no more bullets beneath my sheets, guns behind my head. Baby, now I'm finding out that I like life on the run. From 666, the crucifix, my nightmares and your gun. I'm gonna run from a little liar. Don't waste time with those matches, son, you're already on fire. Yep. Not you, little liar, see I've run your horse before, just to find the finish line and even up the score. You see these scars on my back I got playing with fire, but the biggest one's deep in my chest, and it comes from a little liar. I'm gonna run from a little liar. Don't waste time with those matches, son, you're already on fire. I'm gonna run from a little liar. You've had your turn, I see your burn, you got the mark of a little liar. Yep. Best, I must confess, at messing with my mind. But I start to think everything's pink when I'm looking at her from behind. So thank you, little liar, for getting out of my bed. Don't forget your locket now, you're forgetting your head. I'm on the run from a little liar. Don't waste time with those matches, son, you're already on fire. I'm on the run. Your turn, I see your burn, you got the mark of a little liar. Yep. Somebody else is breaking my bed. No more bullets beneath my sheets, guns behind my head. And baby, now I'm finding out that I like life on the run. From 666, the crucifix, my nightmares and your gun.